Welcome to another episode of Is This for Kids? I'm Jonathan Beard of Blevins, father of 4, and my goodness, we're going to talk about some interesting things today.
And I am Katie, MrsRuvi. I'm a mother of 5 and particularly 2 teenagers, which is why we're going to be talking about a real interesting topic today, and that is romance and sex in movies for teens.
Well, if you have not already listened, go back and listen to our last episode and get some context for what we're going to talk about now. Definitely worth listening to before we get into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, normally we're talking about what comes up in a particular piece of content that you might want to shield a kid from, what kind of conversations you can shepherd them through, and, how you can use media to share in your kids' lives. But in this particular case, we're going to be talking about sort of a trend, an overarching thing, because there's not a lot of new kids media coming out right now. And so it's a good time for us as parents to kind of strategize, come up with some plans, think how we're going to approach the media with our kids, right? So there's this recent thing that came out. It was published on NPR in October of this year, but it came from a study that was in 2023, where they looked at kids born between the years of 1997 and 2012, which is Gen Z, basically. So we're looking from the teenagers to young adults right now. And they asked them, what they feel about seeing sex on TV. And overwhelmingly, these kids said that they are not comfortable with sex scenes in TV and movies, which is weird because you're getting all of these shows like Euphoria that make it seem like teenage sex lives are completely out of control. Or like Ginny and Georgia, go back and look at that episode, right?
Yeah.
So these kids are saying that they're not interested, that it's oversaturated. They would much rather see friendships or, just like close relationships, but they don't need a romance in their things. We saw this kind of with Twisters, right? We were like, why did they never even kissed? That was a little weird.
Yeah.
And I think that's leaning into this, like how young people like their media. So I can hear our more conservative audience being like, excellent. We've moved on.
This is good.
This is wonderful.
It was awkward when we were kids too.
The problem is, you would think that this means that we've got more virtuous teenagers, and that is patently false at this point. According to Common Sense Media, a 2022 study from Common Sense Media said that over 70% of high school age students are accessing pornography. Yep. 50% of them are doing it habitually. They didn't give a percentage, but they said a alarming percentage of those have even accessed it on a school device or at school.
Yeah.
So we're like talking addictive behavior kind of situation, as opposed to just people using it habitually, which again, 50% of kids are habitually using pornography. That's insane. And then an additional 17% say that they have stumbled across it.
By the way, I think that it's actually higher than that.
Yeah.
These
are self-reporting.
I was going to say self-reporting. Yeah. This is something that I am very lucky and blessed to have never had to struggle with, but have counseled thousands of people through over the last 15 years working in the Catholic Church. I think the numbers are even higher than that.
Yeah. And that was a survey of 13 to 17-year-olds that nearly half of them are viewing porn intentionally, which is kind of crazy.
So they're separating that from their movies. They don't want it in their normal daily
right. They
media
don't want
consumption.
The romance to lead to sex, but that doesn't mean they don't want to watch pornography, which is extremely, extremely strange. And couple this with the fact that at this point, 40% of United States high schoolers report having ever had sex. It used to be in the 90s that the majority had sex by the time they left high school. That's not true any longer. Like, people are going into their 20s and then only 40% of them have had sex at that point. So we're dealing with this very weird change in behavior and change in viewing of sex, where it's now become more of a commodity than it is an expression of love. And I think that this is something that the media has played into heavily, but as parents, we really need to be ready to address.
100%.
As parents, we really need to be in a position where we're ready to talk about this. And I think that it has come from this very strange place where parents feel like they don't have the authority to step in on pornographic situations, or they don't feel equipped to, or how to have the conversation. So when you were a kid and you had that conversation with your dad, what did that look like? Because you've never struggled with this.
No, so. Well, and by some miracle, my dad didn't ever talk about it. My mom gave me some advice that I will not share in the podcast, but the thing that my mom said about it to me really stuck with me for my entire life. Mm-hmm. I share that publicly, on my stream sometimes, but won't share in this podcast because she's a saint. It's not the advice that I would give, but it stuck with me enough to be like, oh, losers look at this, so I'm not ever going to do that.
Right.
But for me, I just grew up at the perfect time really for it. Like I did my first smartphone, I was already dating someone. I was already out of high school. Most of my friends who were looking at that kind of stuff were looking at their dad's magazines. That's a conversation I think, I don't know if you want to have in this podcast right now, but I think the reason a lot of parents struggle having the conversation with their kid is because a lot of the parents are continuing to also consume that type of content.
Yeah, and that's really something that we talk about this all the time when we talk about like cell phone usage and social media usage, that the parents' behavior toward it absolutely affects the kids' behavior toward it.
Yeah.
So if your kids, when they're saying that 17% of these kids are reporting having stumbled across it, where do you think they're stumbling across it? It's not like your dad's getting Playboy mailed to the house anymore. It's on your computer and you're clearly not doing a very good job deleting it. And so when we look at this is from a parent perspective, you might say this is adult content, adults can watch it. And I would like to challenge our listeners or our viewers that pornography is not for anybody. Like it's not just not for kids, it's not for adults.
Agree.
Yeah. So there's an entire website that I think is an incredibly good resource. It is a secular website called fightthenewdrug.org, where they talk about pornography and pornography addiction. There's a lot of resources there for parents to get information. There's statistics out there that say things like 70 to 90% of pornography shows violence against women, which I don't think parents really realize. I think that they're thinking of this as like, oh, my kid's going to go look at some nudies, like it's just Playboy. It's not the same anymore. It's not what it used to be. It's a lot more violent. We just had an episode about Andrew Tate that has a whole lot of information in about how young men are being taught to think about women.
Yep.
And how women are viewed as commodities. And I think that this is a huge discussion that fathers in particular need to start having with their sons. And I can't think of a more valuable resource than fightthenewdrug.org. This isn't even sponsored, by the way. They don't even know we exist.
No.
So
I made a joke earlier, off recording. Our good friend of ours, Father Paul, made tweeted something about how important it was back in the day to have like a computer room.
Yes.
That would be kind of a public room in the house, a shared computer that everyone would use. That's a huge thing. We're giving access to devices to kids way too early. We are allowing them to even have iPads or laptops in private areas in the room that they shouldn't have. You just don't do that. You don't lock your kid in a room with a bottle of booze. Why would you lock them in a room with a piece of technology that can very, very easily lead to things that you don't want them to see? Yeah. That's another thing, is the ease of access. You look at my favorite website in the world, my favorite app of all time is Twitter.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
X now. And if you missed, that's where I go for my news. If I hear that the Detroit Lions have an injury, I will type in the player's name. I will go to latest and I will look to see who is saying what about this injury. Mm-hmm. And now with AI, anything that's trending on Twitter, if you click the trending thing, inevitably you are going to see pornographic images. Sometimes not even real ones. Sometimes just AI generated. And so the ease of access is more than ever. And we are just giving that access, unfettered access to the internet to kids way too early. Mm-hmm. And that's just a huge part of it. Yeah.
And I know that a lot of our listeners might be looking at this and thinking like, we are religious. Obviously, John and I are both religious people. Fine. But this doesn't come from a perspective of a religion. Like, statistically, the odds of men being incapable of having sexual relationships after a pornography addiction are incredibly high. The changes in people's brains, the way that it affects them in the same way that a drug addiction affects them. This is a thing that we need to view as a public health crisis, that people are incapable of forming relationships with one another and instead are turning to, even if it's not a real person, you're talking about AI, in their basements or alone or on their foot. And that's the thing with parents, is that you're handing your kid a cell phone. If you're not using anything to restrict that cell phone, you are basically handing them all of the porn in the world. You're just handing it right over to them. And if that cell phone's not coming out of the bedroom at night, if that cell phone isn't being checked by the parent, then you can guarantee that this kid is accessing or at least stumbling upon this. The statistical odds of your kid being the, very small, it was like 25% of kids who have not stumbled across or intentionally looked for pornography is extremely low. Like, it's just not likely that that's you. And so if you're not willing to have this discussion, if you're not willing to get involved, then, you're just ceding control to the entire rest of the world.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the report, and I tried to look to see how authentic the report was, but believable for sure, and interesting that North Korean troops were sent to Russia and had complete access to a bunch of porn, and a bunch of them are just apparently watching it all of the time.
Wow.
Having no access to it in North Korea.
Yeah.
And right now, I will say this too. We did that episode about Andrew Tate. We talked a lot about that. Go listen to that episode. There are a lot of positive influencers out there who are not religious, who are taking a stand and saying, this is not good. If you want to be a real man, this is not something that you are going to do.
Absolutely.
Which is encouraging. It's encouraging to see, to see that people are kind of waking up to this, that it is a real issue. Look at all the famous people in the world who've come out and said that they have sex addiction, that it all started with porn.
Yeah.
It's kind of, the world seems to be waking up to it, and now it's, what do we do? What do we do in order to combat it? We
are not exaggerating to say that this is the new drug. Like, this is just a way that people are using to numb the pain of their existence, to numb, their lives. And we need to be willing, we talked a little bit in that last episode, one of the changes that's happening is that there's less scenes of physical peril. Like, kids are so safe, people are so safe physically, but then they're putting themselves in these positions that harm themselves emotionally. We really need to get out of our heads and out into the world.
100%.
Absolutely. So there you go. We had a little bit of a discussion about pornography. There's no chance we're ever going to get sponsored on this episode, but it's just an important conversation that I think parents need to have. You just have to be willing to have it.
I'm with you. I could go way more into this and share hot takes. I will not.
Maybe one hot take?
I don't think that there's anyone in the world who legitimately believes that it's good. I don't think
no one.
There are people who will defend it. There are people who will defend it to the death online and say it's fine and it's healthy and it's normal. You'll hear, I've met couples who will say, we watch it together. I just challenge you to that relationship cannot be healthy. As if you ever look at someone as an object, you will inevitably look at the people in your lives as objects.
Yeah.
It's just not good. I mean, I've got like, I wouldn't call them close friends. I've got friends who've made awkward comments about my wife. You're not making those comments about your friend's wife if you're not struggling.
Yeah. And the mental health of the Generation Z right now, the people who are saying that they're perfectly comfortable watching porn but not having romance in their content, they have the worst mental health of any generation in the entire world, when they've had more focus on their mental health than any other generation in the entire world. And I think when that's the case, you need to start looking at what they're doing in numbers that wasn't happening in prior generations. And I think pornography is a huge, huge, huge part of that parents need to wake up to.
I'm with you, sister.
Nice.
Look at us.
Hey, if they want more episodes, not necessarily like this, but like maybe about some more specific content, where would they go?
Go to isthisforkids.com. Very active on YouTube and Instagram. Let us know what you want to hear us talk about next. We got your back.
Hey, there is just so much content out there that parents need to know about.
I'm Jonathan Beard of Blevins.
I'm Katie, MrsRuvi. Let us help you decide.
Is this for kids?